Every family has two stories, the one they proudly share and the one they bury deep. For years, my family's version was spotless. The Morgans of Silvercrest Heights, wealthy, admired, polished to perfection. My mother, Evelyn Morgan, a socialite who sponsored every gallery and fundraiser in town. My brother, Caleb, the golden child with the endless charm. And then there was me, Layla Morgan, the quiet one, the afterthought, the relative whose name sat on the edge of everyone's memory. At gatherings, my achievements never made it into the family toast. I was the phase, the lost cause, the one who didn't fit their image of success. That was the story they told the world. But the truth? The truth was something else entirely. The chandeliers of Langford Manor hung like captured constellations, scattering light across gowns, tuxedos, and champagne. Over 200 guests laughed and toasted beneath gold-leaf ceilings, their voices blending with the smooth hum of a jazz quartet. The venue charged more for its floral centerpieces than most people's rent for a year. And there I was, 30 years old, sitting alone at a back table so far from the stage I could barely see the newlyweds through the jungle of roses and glass. My name wasn't even typed neatly on the seating chart. Someone had scrawled it in with a pen, like an afterthought. At the head table, Caleb beamed in a tailored midnight suit. His new bride, wrapped in ivory silk that cost more than my entire year's salary back when I was struggling, sparkled under the lights. Cameras flashed. Laughter rippled. The Morgans were at their finest, a family performance of success and unity. I had been invited only because not inviting me would have raised questions. When the servers began gliding between tables with silver trays, seared salmon, buttered asparagus, imported wine, I waited for my plate. Minutes passed. Then my mother appeared, walking toward me in her beaded gown, heels tapping like judgment. She held a plate that didn't match the others, plain ceramic, chipped at the edge. On it sat a cold slice of chicken, half a biscuit, and a smear of dressing. She set it before me with a smile that was more venom than warmth. "Failures eat what's left," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Seems fitting, doesn't it?" Laughter rippled, uneasy, forced, but real enough to sting. My chest tightened, but I didn't look away. I simply placed my napkin across my lap, straightened my shoulders, and met her eyes. From the head table, Caleb leaned toward his bride. "She should be used to leftovers by now," he murmured. The bride laughed, sharp, brittle, cruel. For most of my life, I'd learned silence, how to absorb humiliation until it became armor. But that silence had sharpened something inside me. So I smiled, slow and steady, and whispered just loud enough for my mother to hear. "Enjoy this moment, Mama. It's the last time you'll ever stand above me." Her smirk faltered, only for a second, before she turned away, pretending not to care. But I saw it, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Across the room, a movement caught my attention. Malcolm Pierce, my brother's new business partner, and as fate would have it, his wife's brother, had gone, still mid-conversation. His gaze locked on mine. His confident grin drained into shock. And then, in a voice that cut through the hum of the orchestra, he said, "Miss Morgan, what are you doing here?" The room fell silent. Forks froze midair. Every head turned. My brother's laughter vanished. My mother's hand trembled. Malcolm's face paled, confusion twisting into dread. And in that frozen moment, the illusion my family had built for decades began to crack, because the man my brother worshipped, the one my mother called a self-made genius, had just revealed the one truth they never wanted the world to know. The daughter they discarded, the one they called worthless, was his boss. Long before the chandeliers of Langford Manor glimmered above my wine glass, I had already learned how to survive in silence. At 19, I was pushing a mop through the corridors of St. Cambria Medical Center, working the overnight shift while taking classes at a local community college by day. The halls smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. My sneakers had holes, my back ached, and exhaustion lived in my bones. When I turned 18, my mother had looked me dead in the eye across the mahogany dining table and said, "You're grown now, Layla. You made your choices." She slid an envelope across the table, $60 inside. "Make something of yourself if you can." I remember laughing, soft, hollow, because I already understood what that meant. It meant alone. So I worked. 3 jobs at once, sleeping in a basement room where the walls wept during rainstorms. Meanwhile, Caleb basked in luxury, business school tuition, new car, endless applause. I never envied him. I just learned to keep my head down. Each night at St. Cambria became a strange kind of education, not in medicine, but in resilience. I learned how to endure, how to move quietly but precisely, how to read people without speaking. And then one night, everything changed. It was a little after 3 a.m. when a man collapsed in the East Corridor, mid-50s, dressed too sharply for that neighborhood at that hour. He sat slumped in a waiting chair, his breathing uneven, his left arm twitching weakly. Stroke, I thought instantly. I shouted for help, ran to his side, and did what little I could until the nurses arrived. They told me later that I'd saved his life. To me, it was just another night. 3 days later, he came back, thinner, pale, but alive. He introduced himself as Victor Langston, founder of Langston and Pierce Enterprises, a powerhouse in digital marketing and urban investment. "You've got good instincts," he said, smiling faintly. "Not everyone notices what others miss." Before I could respond, he pressed a card into my hand. "If you ever need a door opened, call me." I tucked it into my worn wallet and forgot about it. Months passed. Then, little by little, my life started to change. An anonymous scholarship suddenly covered my remaining tuition. An unexpected internship offer arrived from Langston and Pierce itself. When I arrived for orientation, the HR manager smiled knowingly. "We were told to expect you," she said. "I never called that number, not once." I didn't have to. Mr. Langston hadn't given me charity, he'd given me opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands. I stayed late when others went home, learned every system, memorized every campaign. Within 5 years, the girl who once scrubbed hospital floors was managing clients worth tens of millions. At 27, I wasn't just an employee. I was vice president of global strategy. When Victor retired 2 years later, the board's vote was unanimous. They chose me, Layla Morgan, CEO of Langston and Pierce. The morning I signed those papers, I remembered my mother's words. "Make something of yourself if you can." I had, but I didn't call her, or Caleb, or anyone. To them, I was still the invisible one. And that was fine, because being underestimated was my favorite disguise. By the time the Langford Manor wedding rolled around, I had built an empire, quietly, precisely, from the very scraps they'd thrown away. And that night, when Malcolm Pierce's voice echoed across the ballroom, I knew one thing for certain. Every secret eventually steps into the light. Success, no matter how polished, doesn't erase ghosts. It just makes their whispers louder. Even as I expanded Langston and Pierce into one of the top firms in the country, I couldn't shake the weight of my family's rejection. Their disdain had always felt personal, too sharp to be simple favoritism. I'd lie awake some nights wondering why. What made me so unworthy in their eyes? 2 years ago, I decided to find out. I hired a private investigator named Darius Cole, a quiet, sharp-eyed man who didn't ask questions that weren't part of his assignment. I told him simply, "I want to know everything about the Morgans, especially my mother." Weeks passed before he returned with a brown envelope thick enough to alter a lifetime. Inside were photocopies, birth certificates, bank statements, property transfers, even medical records. What I discovered twisted something deep inside me. Caleb wasn't my parents' son. He'd been adopted at 6 months old after a tragic car accident took his biological parents' lives. The documents showed that his late parents had left behind a trust fund, millions of dollars, locked away until he turned 18. But somewhere along the line, my mother had discovered it. She had forged papers, altered records, and presented Caleb as her own child. The trust funds were quietly rerouted into her personal accounts, the same money that bought our mansion, the same money that paid for Caleb's schooling, and the same money she used to keep her place in Silvercrest society. I sat at my desk for hours that night, staring at the proof. All those years I thought she despised me because I wasn't good enough. The truth was simpler and darker. She didn't hate me because I failed her. She hated me because I was real and he was not. Her entire empire was built on theft, of bloodlines, of fortune, of image. And Caleb, blissfully ignorant, had been her perfect pawn. From that night forward, I began to collect everything. Every falsified signature, every secret account, every lie dressed up in pearls and perfume. When Caleb's wedding invitation arrived in gold foil, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reckoning, about showing the world what kind of empire my mother had built, one whispered deception at a time. That night, as I stood under the chandeliers of Langford Manor and Malcolm's trembling voice echoed my name, I knew the time had come. The silence that followed was long and tight, heavy enough to crush breath. My mother's expression flickered, outrage, fear, denial, in one panicked blur. Caleb looked between us, confused, his smile faltering. Malcolm cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. You're Miss Morgan. Delilah Morgan. Murmurs rippled across the room like wind through glass. Someone whispered, the CEO of Langston and Pierce. My mother stood abruptly, her lips stretched into a trembling smile. Darlings, she said to the guests, surely there's been some misunderstanding. Malcolm shook his head. No misunderstanding. She's my employer. Gasps. Forks clattering. Music halted mid-note. I rose slowly, one hand steadying the edge of my table. You wanted me invisible, I said, voice calm but cold. You succeeded until now. Then I reached into my clutch and pulled out a slim folder, the one I had carried for 2 years waiting for this moment. This, I continued, is the truth you've all been dining beside your entire lives. Don't, my mother hissed. Her polished composure cracked like glass under pressure. But I opened it anyway. I lifted the folder, the weight of 2 years' silence in my hands. Caleb Morgan, I said clearly, meeting my brother's stunned eyes, was never born a Morgan at all. A gasp cut through the room. His birth certificate was forged. His inheritance stolen. Gasps turned into murmurs, and murmurs into chaos. Faces shifted from confusion to disbelief. The orchestra stopped playing, leaving only the sound of whispers and clinking glasses. I turned toward my mother, whose carefully powdered face had gone pale. You raised me in shame, I said quietly, told me I'd never amount to anything, while you built your whole life on another family's tragedy. You lied to him. You lied to everyone. And tonight, everyone will finally see who you really are. Caleb's jaw clenched. Tell me she's lying, he demanded, turning to our mother. But she said nothing. Her silence was louder than any confession. The room erupted, voices rising, questions flying, guests half standing between horror and fascination. The camera flashes started, bright and relentless. My mother, trembling but furious, slammed her palm on the table. Enough, she shouted, her voice slicing through the noise. You think you can destroy me with papers and lies? I looked at her, the woman who had built her reputation on poise, on control, and said softly, I don't need to destroy you, Mother. You've done that yourself. Then, from across the room, another voice spoke, deep, steady, unmistakable. For what it's worth, said Malcolm. Everything Miss Morgan just said checks out. I turned to him. He continued, my father, Victor Langston, was the one who helped her verify the records. My mother froze. You what? Malcolm nodded, his tone grim. He said it was time the truth came out, Mrs. Morgan. You can't build a dynasty on stolen lives. The words shattered her completely. Her mask broke, years of elegance collapsing into raw fury. She lunged toward me, fingers curled like claws. You ungrateful child, she screamed. After everything I gave you. I stepped aside calmly. You gave me nothing but pain, I said. And in return, I gave you the one thing you could never fake, consequence. Security, Malcolm's, not mine, moved in quietly, guiding her away as she screamed my name. Guests began filing out in stunned silence, heels clicking against marble, the whispers chasing them like ghosts. The image of perfection she had spent decades polishing was gone, shattered before the very camera she used to court. Caleb sat down slowly, face pale, shoulders hunched. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Because you wouldn't have believed me, I said. But now you'll never forget. A week later, the Langford wedding scandal dominated headlines. Every channel, every paper, every gossip blog carried the story of how one of Silvercrest's most respected families had fallen apart under the chandeliers. Investigations followed swiftly. The forged documents, the embezzled trust, the offshore accounts, all surfaced like ghosts rising from deep water. My mother's name, once spoken with admiration, was now tangled with words like fraud and forgery. Caleb disappeared from the public eye, his company licenses suspended, his reputation shattered. As for Malcolm, he quietly annulled the marriage his sister had rushed into with my brother. When reporters asked for comment, he gave only one line. Truth has a cost, but so does silence. Those words stayed with me. I returned to the city, back to the corner office that overlooked the skyline, tall, gleaming glass reflecting the sunrise. On my desk sat a single object. A plain ceramic plate, cracked down the middle, the very one my mother had placed before me at the wedding, with her cruel smile and cold leftovers. I kept it as a reminder. Power doesn't come from wealth or from people's applause. It comes from endurance, from surviving humiliation without letting it define you. People called what I did revenge. They were wrong. Revenge burns fast and ends in ashes. What I gave my family was clarity, the kind that only comes after every lie has been stripped bare. Weeks later, as the sun dipped below the city's horizon, a message appeared on my phone. It was from Malcolm. I'd like to discuss a new partnership. I smiled, not out of triumph, and certainly not for romance, but because for the first time, I didn't have to hide who I was anymore. The girl they called invisible, the sister they erased, the woman they mocked, had become everything they swore she couldn't be. Layla Morgan, the name they once whispered in shame, was now one the world would never forget. And as I stood by my window watching the city lights bloom, I finally understood. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply becoming everything they told you you'd never be.